Hi all, today we're going to start looking at externalities. Now, these diagrams that we're going to look at get pretty tricky, so we'll strap ourselves in for that. Externalities are the positive or harmful effects on a third party when a good or service is consumed or produced. To show you what these are, I'll start with a couple of examples. So this is me getting an education. While I got benefits to myself of receiving education, I also provide benefits to society through my increased productivity. My enhanced understanding of economics and education means that I provide benefits to third parties who had no role in my decision to study. Externalities can also be negative. So imagine you're sitting in economics class and you're learning about your favorite subject, economics. You're loving life, but then it starts. Your teacher is a renegade smoker who puffs like a chimney all through class. Suddenly, you can't concentrate or breathe properly. Your teacher's choice to smoke is affecting your health. This represents a negative externality. His consumption of cigarettes affects external parties who had no role in his decision to smoke and affects them negatively. Okay, we'll get into the tricky diagrams soon, but first we go back to demand and supply. Demand can also be known as marginal benefit. How much extra benefit we receive when we consume one more of anything. So remember when I handed out the chocolates in class? Each extra one gave less benefit. So that's why the marginal benefit slopes downwards. Supply can also be called marginal cost. The more we do of anything, the greater the opportunity cost becomes, so it slopes upwards. Now, these are only the costs and benefits to the parties involved. So we'll actually call these marginal private costs and marginal private benefit. This is what a market looks like when there are no effects on unrelated third parties. Social costs are equal to the private costs. All the costs that exist are those borne by the decision maker. Likewise, all benefits go to the decision maker, none to third parties. So the market with no externalities. But of course, we've seen that there can be externalities. So let's go back to the smoking teacher. The teacher decides to smoke based on his own private costs and benefits. So this is at Q free, which marginal private costs equals marginal private benefits. Of course, this consumption leads to negative effects on the students, namely passive smoking. Marginal social benefits are therefore less than the private benefits received. Society actually wants consumption here at Q opt, where the social benefits equal the social costs. If we look at the diagram, any consumption beyond Q opt means that costs of society, marginal social costs, are greater than the benefits to society. This represents allocative inefficiency. There is an over-allocation of resources towards smoking. All consumption beyond Q opt represents more social cost than social benefit, and the further we go, the greater the difference is. So it's small here, then the difference gets bigger and bigger. So the area here is what we call the welfare loss or the dead weight loss. Let's go back to education. Society benefits when I get educated. When anyone gets educated, the productive capacity of the economy of society increases, benefiting everyone. Social benefits are my private benefits, plus the benefits I provide to society, the external benefits. Therefore, social benefits are greater than private benefits. The market failure occurs here. I act according to my own costs and benefits, my private costs, private benefits, the time and money I put in to study versus the increased earnings and job satisfaction that I receive. I'll consume education here. Private benefits equal private costs. At this point, however, we have allocative inefficiency from society's point of view. Marginal social benefits are greater than marginal social costs. Social benefits greater than social costs. A lot of you might say, well, that sounds fine. Having social benefits greater than social costs is a good thing. Well, not quite. because then there's all these quantities between Q3, all these quantities of education between Q3 and Q-opt, where the benefit to society is greater than the cost. That means there's all this extra benefit we are not maximizing. If we want to maximize benefit to society, we should be consuming these units of education. So this area here represents the welfare loss to society. It's the potential benefits that we are not enjoying by only consuming education at Q3 and not at Q-opt. Okay, the last thing we need to do with these two examples is to classify the types of externalities that they represent. We've seen negative consumption externalities and positive consumption externalities. Given the definitions, which example applies to which? Okay, that's how it is. Education gives positive effects to others upon its consumption, and smoking gives negative effects to others upon its consumption. There are also production externalities. Let's look at an example of positive production externality. So here, employers train their staff. That's a positive production externality. By producing training, and therefore high quality workers, benefits are extended to third parties. These third parties are going to be future employers who get the benefits of the training, and therefore also society as a whole through the increased productivity, as I said before. The extent of these external benefits is represented by the vertical distance between the two curves here, between the MPC and the MSC. It's important to understand that this applies to all the externalities diagrams, so the ones we've seen and the ones we will see. The vertical distance between the curves will always show the extent of the externality. Here, society would benefit as they would get better workers without incurring the cost of making them better. Therefore, society would want the training done at this point, Q-opt, instead of Q3, where firms would do it. Firms would always be wary about the employees leaving and therefore getting no return on their training investment. In this case, the failure is again an under-allocation of resources to training. We can see that one more unit of training above Q3 would see greater social benefit than cost. So, social benefit greater than social cost. Okay? And so with the next unit of training and the next unit of training, all the way until we get to Q-opt. So the failure here again is the potential social benefits that are not realized. Finally, there are negative production externalities. The production of aluminium is so energy intensive that it's been referred to as aluminium has been referred to as congealed electricity. Therefore, its production will contribute to climate change and also air pollution. So, costs to the producers. Yeah, there we go. Costs to the producers, the private costs, will include the raw materials, the electricity, the labor, and the transport. The social costs are made up of all the private costs because the producers are part of society. So all the private costs plus air quality and climate change. Right, if we go back to the diagram, we see that the social costs are higher than the private costs. The free market equilibrium occurs where the market firm decides to maximize its own benefit. That's going to be here. This is the intersection of the marginal private costs and marginal private benefits. We can see that this point is beyond Q-opt, where society would like to be. So again, this represents an over-allocation of resources. So an over-allocation of resources to aluminium smelting. In this diagram, as in the other three, the welfare loss is where the production or consumption is not allocatively efficient, where marginal social cost does not equal marginal social benefit. So it's here, because every point beyond Q-opt, cost to society is more than the benefit to society, so we shouldn't be doing it. Now, a trick to these diagrams is that the welfare loss will always point to the socially optimum equilibrium. So you can go back and look at the other ones you've drawn. This is where they'll be. They'll always point to Q opt, where MSC equals MSB. We'll briefly look now at how governments can correct these market failures, but we'll go further in class. If we want to change how the market allocates resources, we need policies that will either shift demand, the marginal private benefits curve, or supply, the marginal private cost curve. To shift the demand curve left and correct an over-allocation of resources, the governments could implement information campaigns and negative advertising to change consumers' behaviour. You'll definitely have seen this in the market for cigarettes, for example. Legislation and regulation, these are the rules that governments make. These can also decrease demand. So it's against the law for me to smoke at school, to smoke inside a cafe, to smoke inside my own car if I've got my kids there. These rules are therefore going to decrease my demand for cigarettes. We already know that indirect taxes will increase costs for producers and shift supply to the left. Legislation and regulation can also have this effect. If we want to limit the emissions of aluminium producers, the government might force them to use a certain process, which, while cleaner, may be more expensive. If you think about it, if the government has to use legislation and regulation to force a producer to do something, it's probably going to increase the costs of that producer. Now, to fix an under-allocation of resources, governments can also use information campaigns and advertising. Think of something like vaccinations. You can see how the government might use these. Legislation and regulation can also be used to increase demand. I'm sure you all know people who are only demanding education because they have to be in school or in training until they're 17 years old. Otherwise, they wouldn't be demanding this. Now, to shift supply MPC to the right, to also increase the allocation of resources, the government can subsidise to lower production costs. Another option for the government is to, rather than rely on private businesses to supply, they can provide a good or service themselves. A perfect example of this is public education. In a free market, not enough people would get an education, so governments came up with public schools. Supply shifts to the right and the under-allocation is lessened. All right, we'll leave it there. I'll be testing you on those diagrams. They're going to be tough, but we'll get our heads around them in class. We'll be working with them a lot. Thanks.